still remember the first time you played that song.
It's hard to believe it's been 20 years today.
The late afternoon sun painted the quiet suburban street in golden hues, the scent of freshly cut grass mingling with the faint aroma of blooming flowers. My gaze drifted toward the house next door, where the widow I had only ever waved to from across the fence now stood in the open doorway. Margaret, 40 years old, American Caucasian, with long black hair falling gracefully over her shoulders, looked effortlessly radiant. Her dark brown eyes met mine, sparkling with a mixture of warmth, mischief, and something I couldn't quite name. "Hello there," she said, voice smooth and melodic, carrying the softness of familiarity and the thrill of something unexpected. "I haven't played like this since I was your age." Her words caught me off guard, making my heart skip a beat. She was confident but not intimidating, her posture relaxed yet poised, every movement filled with subtle grace. Her gentle, teasing smile hinted at a playful side I had never imagined existed behind the serene composure I'd seen in glimpses before. She beckoned me toward the small lawn between our houses. A ball lay on the grass, accompanied by a simple hoop she had set up for a game. As she stepped forward, the sunlight glinted off her lightly tanned skin, revealing subtle freckles across her nose and soft laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. Her figure was curvy and graceful, moving with a natural rhythm that seemed effortless yet captivating. We began the game hesitantly, each throw a delicate negotiation of proximity and attention. Her fingers brushed mine as she guided the ball into my hands, fleeting contact that sent a warm thrill through my arm. Every glance she gave me, every tilt of her head as she laughed at my clumsy throw, carried an unspoken intimacy that lingered in the air. Her laugh, light and melodic, filled the space between us, making the street feel smaller, more private, as if the world had shrunk to just the two of us. She moved with confidence, yet there was a quiet vulnerability in the way she allowed herself to play, a softness that made her unexpectedly approachable. I found myself hyper-aware of every detail, the way her hair caught the sunlight, the gentle sway of her hips as she reached for the ball, the subtle curve of her smile that seemed to hold secrets I longed to understand. Between throws, we spoke casually about the neighborhood, our days, and little anecdotes from our past. But even in conversation, there was a rhythm, a subtle tension that pulsed quietly beneath the surface. It was in the lingering glances, the way her hand occasionally brushed mine, and the gentle awareness in her eyes that held my gaze just a moment too long. By the time the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, warm shadows across the lawn, I realized that this encounter was far more than a casual game. It was the beginning of a slow, delicate connection, a bond woven through laughter, subtle touches, and the unspoken curiosity of two people drawn together in a quiet, sunlit moment. That day, Margaret's playful smile left an imprint I couldn't shake, and I knew this was only the start of something quietly, irresistibly electric. The morning after our first encounter, the memory of her smile and the playful spark in her eyes lingered in my mind like sunlight on my skin. I couldn't shake the warmth of her presence, the gentle brush of her fingers, or the way her laughter seemed to settle into the quiet spaces around me. That day, as I walked past her house, the screen door opened before I even reached the gate. Margaret, 40 years old, American Caucasian, with long black hair flowing over her shoulders, was standing there with a cup of iced tea in hand, the sunlight glinting off her soft, tanned skin. Her dark brown eyes met mine, and for a moment, the street around us faded, leaving only the pull between us. "I was hoping to see you again," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that went beyond casual neighborly courtesy. The subtle curve of her lips and the gentle arch of her eyebrows added a teasing undertone to her words. "Care to join me for a game?" I nodded, heart pounding, aware of the small thrill that ran through me at her directness. She led me to the small patch of lawn behind her house, where the sunlight spilled in golden streams, illuminating the neatly arranged hoop and the bright ball she had set up. The casual invitation felt like more than just a game. It was a deliberate opening into her world, a space that felt simultaneously safe and electrifying. As we played, the rhythm of the game became an unspoken conversation. Her eyes followed my movements, dark brown orbs filled with amusement and curiosity, and occasionally her gaze would hold mine just a second too long. Each laugh, each playful admonition, carried a quiet intimacy, a subtle tension that hovered in the bright, sunlit air. Her movements were fluid and natural. The curve of her hips as she bent to pick up the ball, the gentle sway of her shoulders, the confident grace in every step. Her long black hair caught the sunlight, highlighting the soft sheen and the occasional stray strand that brushed her face, making her appear both approachable and effortlessly magnetic. Each time her fingers brushed mine, whether intentional or accidental, a warmth spread through me, and my awareness of her presence intensified. We paused occasionally, catching our breath in the shade of a small tree. She leaned slightly, resting her elbow on her knee, and for a moment, her eyes softened in a way that suggested vulnerability beneath her confident, MILF-like exterior. "You're more focused than I expected," she remarked quietly, and there was a hint of admiration, or maybe something more, in her tone. As the game ended, she smiled warmly, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips that left my heart fluttering. The sunlight bathed her figure, revealing the delicate freckling across her cheeks and the subtle laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, signs of a life lived fully, gracefully, and with quiet strength. Walking home that afternoon, I realized that the invitation wasn't just to play a game. It was a doorway into something subtle yet compelling, a slow, deliberate bond that was beginning to take shape, built on glances, touches, laughter, and the unspoken curiosity of two people drawn together by warmth, presence, and the quiet thrill of connection. The memory of her smile lingered, promising more than just games in the sun. By the third afternoon, the warmth between us had begun to settle into a quiet rhythm. The street outside felt brighter, almost as if it existed solely for the two of us. Margaret, 40 years old, American Caucasian, with long black hair cascading down her back, stood in the sunlit yard, a soft smile playing on her lips. Her dark brown eyes met mine with a knowing warmth, as though she recognized the flutter of anticipation in my chest. The sunlight caught the slight freckles across her nose and the soft laugh lines framing her eyes, highlighting a graceful, lived-in beauty that drew me in without effort. "Ready for round 3?" she asked, her voice smooth and teasing, carrying a melody that made the air feel lighter. The casual question hid a subtle tension, a quiet promise that something in the game would feel different this time. As we began, I noticed how naturally her body moved. The gentle sway of her hips as she pivoted, the confident arch of her shoulders, and the graceful extension of her arms when she threw the ball. Each motion felt deliberate, yet easy, a mixture of strength and elegance. My eyes followed her, aware of the soft warmth of her skin, the subtle curve of her figure, and the small, fleeting glances she gave me that hinted at something deeper beneath the playful exterior. During a pause, she bent to retrieve the ball, and our hands brushed. The contact was brief, unintentional, or perhaps intentionally fleeting, but the warmth lingered, threading a subtle current through the space between us. I felt acutely conscious of her presence, the way the sunlight caught her hair, the delicate curve of her fingers, and the quiet energy that seemed to hum in the air. We talked more this time, moving beyond playful banter. Her voice remained soft and melodic, but there was a depth to it now, a trace of vulnerability peeking through her confident demeanor. She shared small stories from her past, and I found myself leaning in, captivated not just by her words, but by the rhythm of her gestures, the warmth in her gaze, and the subtle sway of her posture as she spoke. When I attempted a throw, she laughed, a low, genuine sound that made the world feel suspended for a moment. The way her dark brown eyes crinkled at the corners, combined with the faint freckles and soft lines on her face, left a lasting imprint in my mind. Every laugh, every glance, and every subtle touch was layering a delicate tension, a slow-burning connection that neither of us needed to name aloud. As the sun began to dip, casting golden light across the lawn, I realized this wasn't merely a game. It was an unspoken dance, a series of small gestures, fleeting touches, and lingering glances that communicated more than words ever could. The connection between us had deepened subtly, quietly, a slow, patient thread weaving warmth, trust, and unspoken desire into a fabric that was uniquely ours. Walking back toward my house, I carried the memory of her smile, the brush of her fingers, and the quiet, electrifying awareness of her presence. It wasn't just about the game anymore. It was about the subtle intimacy forming between us, delicate, layered, and impossibly magnetic. That afternoon, I understood that every touch, every glance, and every laugh was pulling us closer, building a connection neither of us could resist. By the fourth meeting, the world outside seemed to fade whenever I approached Margaret's house. The late afternoon sun bathed the yard in a warm golden glow, and the gentle hum of distant traffic felt distant, almost irrelevant. Margaret, 40 years old, American Caucasian, with long black hair flowing over her shoulders, stood near the small flower bed she had tended so carefully. Her dark brown eyes lifted as I arrived, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips, and the sight made my chest tighten in a way I had begun to recognize as anticipation. "Glad you came," she said, her voice soft but deliberate, carrying the subtle lilt of teasing warmth. She held a small watering can in her hands, and I noticed how the sunlight caught the soft sheen of her lightly tanned skin, highlighting the delicate freckles across her nose and the graceful curve of her wrists. Her presence radiated confidence and ease, yet beneath it was a quiet vulnerability that drew me in more with every encounter. She invited me closer, not for a game this time, but to help with a few chores around the garden. It was a simple request, yet carried an intimacy that felt private, suspended in time. As I bent to help with the soil, our shoulders brushed. The contact was brief, but deliberate enough to leave a warm trace along my arm. Her glances held a subtle acknowledgement, and for a heartbeat, the playful distance of previous meetings melted away. We worked side by side, exchanging small, casual words about plants and sunlight, yet each conversation was layered with a growing awareness. The tilt of her head as she watched me adjust a plant, the gentle movement of her hands as she smoothed the soil, and the faint smile curling her lips all created a quiet intimacy. Every gesture was deliberate, almost choreographed, yet entirely natural, a slow dance of presence and attention that neither of us could ignore. At one point, she leaned over to show me the proper way to tie a support stake, and her hair brushed against my arm. I felt the warmth of her skin, subtle and electrifying, a delicate shiver running through me. She held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, and I could sense the same charged curiosity mirrored in her dark brown eyes. Words weren't needed. The silent acknowledgement of proximity, shared space, and mutual awareness said more than speech ever could. As the task finished, she stepped back, folding her hands lightly in front of her. "You've got a careful touch," she said, her voice low and steady, a hint of admiration threading through the warmth. The praise carried something more than acknowledgement of skill. It felt personal, intimate, and slightly teasing. Walking home later, the memory of that moment lingered like the last rays of sunlight on the garden. The subtle touches, the quiet glances, and the shared activity had created a layer of connection deeper than the playful games of previous days. Margaret's presence had become something I noticed in every small gesture, every soft glance, every deliberate smile. That afternoon, I realized our connection was no longer simply about games or proximity. It had grown into a slow, delicate intimacy, charged with warmth, curiosity, and the unspoken thrill of being truly seen by someone so gracefully magnetic. The fifth afternoon arrived with a soft, golden warmth, the sunlight spilling over the quiet street and illuminating the neat row of houses. As I approached Margaret's home, Margaret, 40 years old, American Caucasian, with long black hair flowing loosely over her shoulders, was in her small front garden. Her dark brown eyes lifted toward me, and the faint smile on her lips carried a mixture of amusement and something deeper, a quiet invitation I felt drawn to. Her lightly tanned skin glowed in the sunlight, freckles dancing across her nose and cheeks, while the soft laugh lines at the corners of her eyes made her smile feel personal, intimate, and impossible to ignore. "Glad you came," she said, her voice smooth and welcoming. There was a subtle warmth in her tone, one that hinted at a shared understanding, that these afternoons were becoming more than casual visits. She gestured toward the small patio at the back of her house, where a couple of chairs waited in the sun-dappled light. We sat, facing each other across the small table, a space charged with unspoken tension. The previous encounters had built a quiet rhythm, a layering of familiarity and curiosity, and now it seemed the air between us held more weight. Each glance, each fleeting touch of hands as we adjusted chairs or reached for cups, carried an intensity one could feel in my chest. "I've enjoyed these afternoons," she began softly, dark brown eyes holding mine with a careful steadiness. Her fingers rested lightly on the table, occasionally brushing mine as she reached for her tea. "More than I expected. You notice things most people don't, and I've realized I like that about you." Her words hit with a subtle force. The simplicity of her confession, paired with the warmth in her gaze, made the space between us feel both safe and electric. Every small gesture, the tilt of her head, the gentle sway of her shoulders, the soft curve of her smile, carried meaning. My awareness of her presence intensified, every detail magnified. The way her hair caught the light, the graceful curve of her wrists, the soft warmth of her skin whenever our hands brushed. We spoke in quiet tones, sharing fragments of our lives, small confessions, and hidden stories. Her voice carried a melodic rhythm, each word imbued with thoughtfulness and care. I noticed the subtle way she leaned in when speaking, as if the space between us could carry the weight of our unspoken understanding. Her vulnerability beneath the poised exterior made her presence feel magnetic, drawing me closer in a way that was gentle, deliberate, and unavoidably intimate. When she laughed, it was soft and genuine, a sound that lingered in the air long after, echoing in the quiet corners of my mind. The afternoon ended with a lingering glance, a silent acknowledgement that what had grown between us was more than casual curiosity. Our connection had deepened, becoming a delicate blend of warmth, trust, and unspoken desire. Walking home, I carried the memory of that quiet confession like a secret treasure. Margaret's presence had become a force in my life, subtle, captivating, and impossible to ignore. The afternoon had revealed a new layer to our relationship, one built on attention, shared moments, and the slow-burning intensity of a connection neither of us yet had the courage to fully name. The sixth meeting carried a different kind of anticipation. The sun was higher in the sky, casting bright, warm light over the suburban street. Margaret, 40 years old, American Caucasian, with long black hair falling over her shoulders, was outside tending to her small herb garden. Her dark brown eyes lifted as I approached, and the soft curve of her lips, paired with the slight tilt of her head, made my heart skip a beat. She radiated a graceful confidence, yet beneath it, I sensed a quiet vulnerability that made her presence magnetic. Her lightly tanned skin glowed in the sunlight, freckles across her nose adding a delicate, human touch, while the soft laugh lines at her eyes suggested warmth and lived experience. "Thought I'd try something different today," she said, her voice light but deliberate. There was a playful edge to her tone that hinted at a closeness we had built over the past weeks. She held a watering can in one hand, and as I stepped closer to help, our hands brushed, leaving a lingering warmth along my forearm. That small, accidental touch sent a thrill up my spine, reminding me just how keenly aware I had become of her presence. We moved together around the garden, tending the herbs, adjusting small pots, and exchanging quiet conversation. The rhythm of our actions carried a subtle intimacy. Her eyes often flicked to mine, dark brown and attentive, holding a glimmer of curiosity that mirrored my own feelings. Every time our hands crossed, even briefly, I felt the electricity of connection. Her movements were effortless yet deliberate. The sway of her shoulders, the careful placement of her hands as she smoothed the soil, the gentle arch of her back as she bent to tend a plant. During a pause, she leaned against the railing of the porch, sunlight catching the soft sheen of her black hair. Her expression softened as she watched me adjust a plant. "You pay attention," she said quietly, almost to herself, but I caught the tone meant for me. It wasn't just about the task. It was about noticing her, being present in the moment, and sharing these small intimacies. She reached for a small sprig of rosemary and handed it to me, her fingers brushing mine once again. The contact lingered longer than necessary, a deliberate, fleeting moment that made the space between us feel charged. I noticed every detail, the gentle curve of her nails, the warmth of her skin, the slight curl of her hair against her shoulders. Each touch, each glance, each quiet smile deepened the unspoken connection we had been building over weeks. As the sun began to tilt westward, casting long shadows across the garden, we stood together in the lingering warmth. The playful teasing of our first meetings had evolved into something richer, more tender, a slow-burning intimacy where touches carried meaning, glances spoke volumes, and proximity was more than coincidence. That afternoon, I realized our connection had reached a new depth. The garden, the sunlight, the lingering warmth of her fingers on mine. It all wove a tapestry of subtle tension, quiet affection, and emotional closeness that neither of us could deny. Walking home later, the memory of that lingering touch stayed with me, a pulse of warmth and anticipation that promised our story was far from over. The intimacy between us had shifted, from playful teasing to something undeniably real, quietly compelling, and irresistibly magnetic. The seventh and final encounter felt different from all the others, as if the universe itself had slowed to let the moment breathe. The afternoon sun bathed the quiet street in warm, golden light, highlighting every detail of Margaret, 40 years old, American Caucasian, with long black hair cascading over her shoulders. Her dark brown eyes met mine as I approached, soft and steady, carrying the warmth of familiarity and the subtle intensity of something unspoken. The freckles across her nose, the soft laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, and the graceful curve of her figure radiated a lived-in elegance that made my chest tighten with quiet anticipation. "Good to see you," she said, her voice calm but layered with a delicate excitement. The tone carried a playful yet sincere weight, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond we had formed over the past weeks. There was a gentle confidence in her posture, the sway of her shoulders as she stepped closer, and the warmth in her smile that hinted at an intimacy deeper than words. This meeting wasn't about games or small tasks. It was about presence, truly noticing one another, allowing the connection to exist fully in the quiet space we shared. We stood close, the sunlight highlighting the subtle curve of her wrists and the way her long black hair caught the glow of the afternoon. Every movement, from the tilt of her head to the soft adjustment of her stance, carried an unspoken message. She trusted me, and I trusted her. At one point, our hands met as we reached for a small garden tool, simultaneously. This time, the touch lingered, deliberate, warm, and comforting. I felt the gentle steadiness of her palm against mine, a grounding presence that spoke of mutual care and emotional intimacy. Her dark brown eyes held mine, and in that gaze, I recognized a quiet longing mirrored in my own chest. The playful teasing of our early meetings had evolved into a tender, charged awareness of one another. We spoke softly, exchanging thoughts, small confessions, and reflections on the time we had shared. Every pause was meaningful, every glance deliberate. The warmth of her presence filled the space between us, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, no distance, only the slow, deliberate flow of shared emotion. Her lightly tanned skin, the subtle freckles, and the soft laugh lines created a texture of reality, grounding the intimacy in human familiarity rather than fantasy. Eventually, she stepped closer, her hand brushing my shoulder lightly. The gesture was innocent yet full of meaning, a symbol of trust, closeness, and the emotional bridge we had built. I realized then that our connection was complete. Playful curiosity had blossomed into profound emotional intimacy. The garden, the sunlight, the lingering touches, and the soft smiles had all woven together into a quiet symphony of trust, affection, and subtle desire. As the sun began to dip behind the rooftops, I felt a deep, abiding warmth, not just from the afternoon light, but from the bond that had formed between us. Margaret's presence, her gentle guidance, and the steady intimacy we shared had created something unforgettable. That day, in that sunlit yard, I understood that our connection was no longer about fleeting touches or stolen glances. It was a full, heartfelt embrace of emotions, curiosity, and mutual respect. The slow-burn romance we had nurtured had reached its satisfying, tender conclusion, leaving a lingering sense of warmth that would stay long after the shadows grew.